we enter turn 5, the Japanese have a choice with the air combat of taking the opportunity to move or fire at any stage in the complete round. In this case, they take an opportunity to fire before any other movement takes place, whether that is in the air or on the ground. The aerial combat really didn't have much played out in it. One of the Zeros is down to 50% hit points, same with the P40 it's engaged with. Over here, this Zero doing somewhat better unscathed, P40 down to 50% of its hit points. The 3 Vals engaged the single P40 Warhawk, achieving nothing. In return, the Warhawk scoring 1 or 2 hit points on one of the Vals. I think round 6 will be the conclusive outcome of this first engagement. So stay put for the remainder of round 5. So over here on the Japanese left flank, they charge into the village, having fired in some indirect fire support from the regimental guns. The initial break-in results in some losses as they push into the buildings. However, elements of the Chinese forces counter-attack and the Japanese don't get it all their way. The Chinese morale holds, but in the second round of melee, the sword attack really comes into its own and the initial Chinese positions are wiped out. They're low 50% strength. They take a morale test, failing it, but as they have a political officer, they get a re-roll, which they survive, but the exchange will be another loss of a base. So that's down to 2 bases and the political officer holding a defensive position behind the barbed wire, and still a significant amount of fanatical Japanese supported by their tankettes pushing up through the village on this left flank. It is not looking good for the Chinese nationalists at all. Meanwhile, in the centre, the Japanese continue to push against the Chinese engineer sapper platoon, but without much effect. They are dug in, they have their flamethrowers, and they have not been able to winkle the Chinese out at all. They're preparing themselves for a banzai charge, which could be interesting given the defensive position that the Chinese are in. Meanwhile, over on the Japanese right flank, they continue to push towards the Chinese nationalist platoon position. They fired some indirect fire support. This has had no effect to the dug-in troops. However, they continue to push forward using the civilian screen, which is having good effect in reducing outgoing fire. Not all going the Japanese way. They had pushed up their anti-tank mixed machine gun 20mm anti-tank platoon to knock out the last of the Chinese armoured cars. Sadly had no effect. The armoured car got itself safe from a pin down, returned fire, and with 2 excellent hits took the platoon down to just over 50%. 1 anti-tank rifle destroyed and 1 heavy machine gun knocked out. So still hanging on for grim death as we move into the Chinese round of turn 5. Round 5 and the Chinese nationalist right wing holding on for grim death with 3 stands dug in behind the barbed wire. They've now got their mortars coming in, which have had some limited effect, but they have managed to pin the platoon, slowing them down. However, the tankettes still pushing forward, so still remaining very vulnerable for the Chinese on the right flank. The aerial combat continues. No real firm result here as Close Air Patrol continues to mix it with the incoming Vals supported by Zeros. Meanwhile, in the centre, more success really for the Chinese nationalists, whilst a small platoon engineers are well dug in, equipped with a flamethrower. This has hit, killed and now pinned this central Japanese platoon. They then took a skill test, which they passed, which means the flamethrower unit remains in stay for this round. Going to be very interesting. Can the Japanese unpin themselves as we go into round 6? Meanwhile, on the Chinese left flank, the Chinese decide to ignore the US advisors, and with their artillery, they decide to engage the advancing Japanese platoon with the civilian screen. This has some effect. A lot of civilians are killed, sadly, but 2 of the Japanese platoon units are taken down, causing them to pin. This is then supported by the lone outstanding armoured car, which has engaged the 20mm anti-tank rifle mixed platoon supported by machine guns, and as mentioned before, 2 of them have been destroyed. So well done, single armoured car. However, can it survive and pull back, or will it continue to engage and harass this infantry platoon as it moves forward? All to play for as we turn into round 6, so let's see where that takes us. So on the Japanese left flank, the platoon commander decides to pull back out of range of the artillery, mortars and the remainder of the dug-in platoon. He's pulled back into the and formed a defensive line on the railway. He's pushed forward the 2 tankettes, knowing that the remaining nationalists have got no anti-tank capability, intent of mowing them down and then breaking through the defensive position, which will leave the whole of the left flank open and allow them to push up onto the battalion headquarters and the mortar platoon. In the centre, the Japanese fearless roll a 3, unpin, and they now prepare for a banzai assault in on the assault pioneer platoon. It's going to be very interesting to see how this one plays out. Again, on the right flank, the Japanese were pinned down by artillery fire. Again, these fearless really coming into their own. They unpin and prefer to push forward on the remaining right-hand Chinese nationalist platoon. So now the Chinese are under pressure on their left flank, the Japanese right, and also in the centre. So it's going to be really, I think, the turning point of the game, how these 2 combats will play out today. The aerial combat seems to be very even-handed at the minute. 1-0 being shot down by one of the P-40s. However, that P-40 itself is very badly damaged. Meanwhile, over on the other 0 engagement, 1-0 totally unscathed. P-40 shot to pieces inside 2 rounds. The Vals still not having much success, very limited damage onto the P-40. However, one of the Vals is smoking badly, and it's only a matter of time. So following this engagement, I think round 7 will really see the air combat play out. Can the Zeros continue to push through and allow these Vals to break through and go for the target, the heavily dug in Chinese nationalist platoon of artillery, which is causing so much damage onto the Japanese right flank? Round 7 sees the eventual completion of the initial air combat. One of the 3 Vals is destroyed by the P-40, following her down as she burns. However, on the other side is the other wingman. He's been shot down by the Zero, and this has allowed 2 of the Vals to punch through the close air patrol and get ready to dive bomb the artillery position dug in on the Chinese nationalist left flank. So this is going to be very interesting as we push into round 8. What effect can the Val dive bombers have on this very heavily fortified defensive position? Meanwhile, over on the Japanese right flank, the platoon assaulted into the nationalists. The battle went back and forward at least 4 times before the Japanese were forced back. They have only the platoon commander and 2 supporting elements left. Very, very difficult indeed. Meanwhile, in the centre, very quickly, the banzai assault broke the assault pioneers and pushed them out of the defensive position back onto their anti-tank guns. So, concluding round 7, we have the 2 tankettes held up against the Chinese defensive position. We got the Chinese observer trying to get into a new position to bring down fire support. The platoon has consolidated itself behind the village on the defensive line of the railway. In the centre, the Chinese centre that's effectively broke, and the Japanese are pushed into the logging camp and will be preparing to push up against the defensive positions and potentially assault the anti-tank platoon holding the centre just to the left of the bridge. Meanwhile, on the Japanese right flank, effectively it's come to a stall. The Japanese platoon alive, but effectively non-combat effective, with only 3 blocks left. The Chinese platoon not much better off, likely to be falling back onto the main defensive position up on the hill. And the only other supporting Japanese platoon at the minute is down to 50% from support weapons. Both sides desperately in need of both their armour and the reserve infantry. Finally, the aerial combat. Well, that's been very interesting. We've had the close air patrol effectively wiped out. Only 1 aircraft remaining, and she is badly burning. And 2 of the Vals have managed to push through and prepare for a dive bomb attack onto the artillery platoon. So all to play for as we go into round 8. So stay with me till next time. Thank you very much.